Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. I'm your host, Sabrina, and I'm joined by my other host, Jane. How are you doing?
People who listen to this podcast and know me knows that I question my sanity and decision making every year as to why I'm living here and not in Los Angeles. So, here I am again, questioning myself, but yeah, things are good. We had a lot of family over for the holiday season. So it was very wholesome and warm in that sense.
But yeah, so excited to be here. And we do have another very special guest, and we're going to be talking about toxic relationships. Spicy.
I know.
So we're going to be talking about how to recognize you're in one, how to navigate them, how to work on changing them, and also exploring sort of the line when enough is enough and how to get out. And so I just want to, I want to add a disclaimer though before we dive into this, because we are drawing a very hard line here at any sort of physical abuse, right?
Yes.
So so this conversation is much more about the gray area of some of this emotional abuse, right? What is the emotional abuse versus when is it just a matter of ups and downs of any relationship that get harder? As we know, every relationship has conflict and gets harder. So think like the microaggressions and anything that sort of can emerge and grow rather than the serious abuse.
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I have the absolute pleasure to introduce Anna Badursk, a dear friend of mine. And while she is now in a very healthy relationship and happily engaged to one of the best guys out there, Tim, if you're listening, Anna has had a fair share of difficult and toxic relationships, like many of us, right? And she has been removed enough, though, now to really to the point that you can share about them openly, right? So, Anna, please introduce yourself for our listeners.
So yes, hi, I'm Anna Badursk. I currently am residing here in the Twin Cities with Sabrina, not with, but near Sabrina. Originally from Michigan, where I've had my fair share of toxic relationships. So I'm here to spill all, tell all, and just help inform everybody of like that gray area. Where's the line with the toxic relationships? But yeah, I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, we are excited. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, it'll be so helpful for our listeners to just, figure out some of the signs, like when you're in a toxic relationship, because sometimes you may question yourself, right? Like, am I crazy, or is this really something I should get out of? And so just for everyone to know that you're not alone, and Anna is going to be so well positioned to talk about this and come out on the other side. I mean, just so happy to see her thrive right now. I actually have a funny quick anecdote before we dive in, the engagement story about Anna. So I would be remiss not to share. So the amazing Tim, her fiance, planned a surprise engagement. And the idea was to propose in a movie theater for a special showing of the Cocaine Bear movie. I mean, speaking of surprises, right? And so we were all in a group chat, chatting away, planning this. And so on the day of, there was still that group chat, but Tim added Anna just to sort of plan the day and like talk about when we're going to meet beforehand. And Sabrina, I don't know, I probably didn't have coffee yet, but I just didn't know that you were in that chat. And so I accidentally, so someone was asking, so where we're going to meet before and where we're going to go at after. And I said, and I had to go back to my text messages here, I could meet before, though I need to take some chill pills so I won't show my excitement too much. Then again, I can't even imagine what you must be feeling right now, Tim. So immediately after following this text message, I got calls from Tim and from all the other people like, oh my God, Anna's on this chat. And so, yeah, my heart never sank like lower in my life. Like I felt so bad. Thankfully, I didn't say anything like more obvious. And then thankfully people were kind of like playing it down and like, oh yeah, the movie is gonna be so funny, haha. But yeah, anyway, long story short, it was one of the most beautiful engagements. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but instead of the Cocaine Bear, they had a special like Tim created a movie just with pictures and videos of Anna and their time together and then proposed. But yeah, sorry, Anna, I don't want to tell your story, but
No, it's funny because I thought that you that night I thought you were mad at me for something because you weren't talking to me, but it was because you were so nervous. So
Yeah.
Oh no.
I thought that was so funny. I was like, oh my gosh, Sabrina, is she okay? Did I do something? Um,
Yeah.
and that night too, I wanted to see everybody and hang out with everyone, but I was like, I don't really want to go see Cocaine Bear. I was like, my stomach's kind of hurting, Tim. I don't think I'm gonna go. And he was like, no, please, you have to go. And
Yeah. It was, yeah, because
I felt
we
so
met
bad.
up beforehand, right? And then we met at
Yep.
just like at a bar for one drink, and I was wearing this ring, this like green ring, and Anna goes, "Oh my God, what a beautiful ring!" And I was like, "Don't talk to me. I can't talk to you right now. I need to go to the bathroom." Like I was so nervous. Like, please don't. Anyway, but yeah, so that was just a quick tangent here, but so excited for today's conversation. Again, we just hope
Yes.
that our listeners can take away a lot of learnings. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jane to kick us off.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is the first time I'm hearing this, but I do want to know. So Anna, was it at the end of the day a surprise, or did you like know that it was kind of coming?
Oh, it was a total surprise. Even when the video was showing on the screen, it
Uh-huh.
wasn't registering in my head that oh, this is the proposal.
Thank God.
I had
Oh my gosh.
because we were going to Mexico a month out, and so I had my mindset on he's proposing in Mexico, and that's that.
Oh my
So,
goodness. I can't believe you almost did not attend your own proposal.
oh yeah, I feel so bad.
Yeah.
I'm an awful person. I know.
Well, oh
We
my
would have
gosh,
said in the
thank
movie
you.
theater.
Thank you so much for being here today with us. We're so excited, and we know that this is obviously such a sensitive topic and that different people have different experiences. So similar to Sabrina's, disclaimer, we're here to talk about our personal experience and really ultimately to hopefully help people, give people the right questions to ask themselves and really just help evaluate if you happen to be in situations like this. So before we even get into it, this podcast, Sabrina and I love a definition. A lot of times we'll open with a
Love.
definition. So we did Google the definition of toxic. And what we found is a relationship is toxic when your well-being is threatened in some way, emotionally, psychologically, or even physically. On a basic level, any relationship that makes you feel worse rather than better can become toxic over time. And I think this is kind of where it starts to get a little blurry or gray, right? Because it's not something that happens on day one. It takes a lot of time. It develops over the course of the relationship. And I think that's really where we want to explore and help people catch that pattern or rhythm before it gets into a bad place. So, Anna, maybe the first question for you is like, what is your definition of toxic, especially just having had your own personal experience?
Yeah, definitely something that's affecting my well-being and my mental health. When I first think of toxic, I think of poison. And when you're in a toxic relationship, it is poisonous to who you are at your core. People do end up changing when they're in toxic relationships, and mostly for the worse. So, that's kind of where my mind went to, was just poison.
Obviously, Anna, right now you're very happy. But for our listeners, would love for you to share a little bit more about your previous experiences and
Mhm.
how did you recognize that you were in a toxic relationship, right? And some of the signs and patterns that people may want to look out for, or that you may have overlooked that may be good for someone to know. Oh, shoot. And what are some of the learnings from that?
Yeah, I think in my past relationships, I first started to realize that I was in a toxic one when I felt like I wasn't supported, and there was just overall really poor communication. Um, that kind of led down a path of neither one of us wanting to communicate to each other. Um, that resulted in lashing out, that resulted in me not wanting to know where my significant other was the entire day, the entire night, turning blind eyes, right?
Mm.
So that there wasn't a specific point in a relationship where like the light bulb went off and I was like, oh, this is toxic. It was just a bunch of different little things coming to one. And thankfully, I had a really good support system of friends who were calling out things in my relationship. And that's when I started to understand like, hey, this is not normal. This is probably a toxic situation.
Yeah. And I would love to dig a little bit further into that, because I think a lot of times when we think about toxicity in a relationship, we think of gaslighting. Like there's a lot of words, right, that people tend to use. So gaslighting is one of them. Love bombing is one of them. Narcissist jealousy. Like there's just a lot of those terms. And we think of really extreme characters, right? We think of extreme situations where people are gaslighting you, and people like often are immediately triggered when we hear those words. But from your experience, like you mentioned, a lot of this happened over time, and it's things on top of other situations, on top of other scenarios. What's been like your relationship with some of these, whether it's gaslighting, love bombing, or was it one type, or what's been your experience, and how did some of those behaviors develop over those relationships?
Yeah, now that I'm out of those relationships, I can really see clearly, what went on and what went wrong. And my toxic relationships all started with love bombing. I didn't necessarily like myself. I didn't really love myself. I didn't have self-love. And I didn't, desire myself. And so I wanted to look for that in other people. I wanted someone to love me because I couldn't love myself. I wanted someone to desire me. I wanted somebody to suffocate me with affection. And I think I made that a little too clear earlier in my life, to the point where specific people could catch on to that and take advantage of it. And that's what happened. So I have a lot of experience with love bombing. And I think in any toxic relationship, there is going to be gaslighting, whether it's extreme or not. I think that usually comes into your relationship maybe around the honeymoon phase. When you're getting out of that phase, the love bombing stops and the gaslighting starts to come in. And that's when usually the person who is on the other side, the victim side, we can say, or the love bombing side of it, they start to see the relationship through a different lens, and sometimes can pick up like, hey, this is gaslighting, this is toxic, this isn't right. Let me try to get out of this, or let's try to have a conversation about it. So I think the love bombing is tricky because you don't realize that it's happening to you unless you have a history with it. And then with gaslighting comes later. And I think usually most people can catch on to it unless you're not used to that, and you truly do think that you are the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Which in some situations, like people are in a relationship for so long that they believe that they are the problem. You know what I mean? Or a lot of times the story is being told in a certain way where it really like guilts the person, like the victim of the gaslighting, to the point where they genuinely believe that they're the ones creating drama. They're the crazy one. They're the this, they're the that. So it happens far too frequently. I feel like it happens a lot, especially. And this is something Sabrina and I have talked about, is like the older we get, the more, to your point, a lot of the insecurities are gone. We're working on ourselves. We are a lot more secure, and it's a lot easier to identify the gaslighting, and because you're a lot more confident in your own thoughts and behaviors and just perspective. So 100% agree with your experience. But considering that this is a podcast where we explore different perspectives, obviously, when we're thinking about love bombing and gaslighting and these terms, we're thinking those extreme cases.
Right.
But in day to day, a lot of these are kind of microaggressions. Like these are not just really intense fights that are happening all the time. These could be little jabs here and there, comments, behaviors that over time becomes a problem. Right. So how do you, or even for our audience, how could one differentiate the difference between a joke that is just a joke or versus ill intentioned, right? Like I am making fun of you, or I am, this is like, like you're actually offending your partner, or, a lot of people often question, like, am I being too sensitive, or did this thing genuinely trigger me? Like, am I just, right? Like, am I affected by this? Or is this truly like triggering? I think there's a lot of different scenarios that we can kind of bring up, but like, how does somebody differentiate some of that? Because they're small things.
Yeah. And I've personally have had a really hard time differentiating that as well. And so it got to the point where I even have gone to therapy for it, because I'm like, hey, am I crazy, or is that just a joke? Did I overreact? Did I underreact? Um, and I think it comes down to you needing to communicate with your partner. If you feel offended, or if you feel triggered, or you feel like something may have been a joke and you're not sure, you should have the relationship with your partner to the point where you can ask. Try to have that conversation, because you're never going to know unless you try to talk to them. Because we can all be in our head the entire day and start to exaggerate the story more and more, and have it be an even bigger deal when you can just kind of nip it in the bud and just have the conversation. Worst case scenario, your partner's going to say, hey, yeah, that was a jab. I'm angry at you. And, you just kind of have to have a different type of conversation from there on out. But yeah, I think it really just comes down to communication.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's so interesting too, because it sounds like what you're sharing is like having those conversations continuously, right? Like don't let it build up over time. Because I think a lot of times, like, it's happened to all of us where we overthink, we get in our minds, we don't like confront the partner, because it's always difficult to confront like a loved one, and then it ends up you keep recalling the situation in the future when another issue comes up, and you're like, I've had this situation, right? Like, so then it becomes a thing. And I also think, like, based on the person's the person that you're confronting, your partner, whatever, based on their response, it could also help you realize if you're being gaslit or not. Because if you confront them, right, and they're like, oh no, you're just being crazy, then like, am I really right? Like maybe in a way that
Right.
validated that I was not, and that you are being rude or mean or whatever.
I think that was one of my issues in my relationship too. Like, I think I was too scared to set boundaries or to speak up. And that's on me, right? Like, but
Right.
also I didn't have the psychological safety in this relationship to want to speak up, which that's a whole other problem then, right? Maybe I shouldn't be in that relationship, but I think it's like it is a two-way street. So and you talked about the importance of communication, which couldn't agree more. How did you discern, or if we talk about sort of this two-way street, right? On the one side, it is on us, or say like let's say the person that sets the boundary, right? Like it's on us to speak our truth, to stand up for ourselves, and to say if something is bothering us in a calm, constructive way, right? But then it's also on the other person's side to observe and hear and see, like it comes down to EQ maybe. And I want to, not to generalize, but I feel like maybe women have a little bit more EQ than men, right? Without making it about gender too much. But so do you have any examples, or can you touch a little bit more on sort of that dynamic between setting the boundary versus receiving the boundary? Like, were you also on the receiving end of your partner telling you something that maybe they didn't like?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to start out by saying it's both parties' responsibilities to communicate boundaries and to respect each other's boundaries. And I also want to say too that, you come to your partner saying, hey, I have these boundaries. Sometime in the future, your partner may slip up, and, you know, just as long as you're able to have another conversation about it, respectful conversation, and saying, hey, I set this boundary for you in the past. I noticed you slipped up a little bit. Can you please just work on it? and go about it that way. Specifically, Tim and I, when we first started dating, we both had boundaries, and we both communicated them to each other. And we would each slip up here or there. And one of his boundaries for me was sometimes I can make jokes at an inappropriate time, right? And a little bit down the road, like a few weeks later, I remember I made another joke at an inappropriate time. He was like, "Hey, we talked about this." And I was like, "You're so right. I'm so sorry. I will work on it." And here we are, and my jokes have been contained. Very happy. And from my perspective too, with my boundary with him, our communication when we first started dating wasn't the best of the best. And I told him that, for my next relationship, serious relationship, I have to have this be part of it. And it's continuous communication about how you're feeling. If you're having a bad day, I want to know about it so that I can help. I can't read your mind. We did have a little bit of a slow start there, but the fact that we were both able to put in that work. And yes, I did have to keep reminding him, but sometimes that's just life. Sometimes you do need to continuously remind your partner of the boundary. And as long as they're respectful of it, and they're listening to you and they want to work on it, I think that's a good sign.
From my experience, like the goal is really get to a point where your partner can like know your behavior, at least to some degree. But to your point, I also think it is really important to check in. Like in one of our other episodes, we talked about, like when you wake up, you ask your partner, what percentage can you give today? Because we all can't give 100% every single day. Like some days are just tough. And sometimes like being able to check in with them, then like, should I be making that joke today? Or like, is that gonna offend? So I think there's some of that meshing that needs to happen before you get into a much better routine.
Yeah, it's just inspiring to see both of you in such healthy relationships now. So that's what I aspire to as well. But I definitely, I think, because I was a late bloomer and I had my first relationships like later on in life, I think I just had to learn a lot. And when Anna mentioned the whole like self-love, like that was also lacking for me. Like I didn't like myself. I was attracting people that, like I'm an empath, and I was attracting people that needed fixing. So I would do a lot of I would attract people that may need help, or they were maybe depressed. And I was like, oh, let me help you. And then they would sort of intentionally or unintentionally kind of take advantage of me. And I would just be anxious, not speak my boundaries, not speak my truth. Like to your point, Jane, when there was at one time that they would just shut me down after I set a boundary, I would get so scared and just not do it again. So yeah, but learning a lot and just seeing examples like both of you and the relationships and the healthy dynamic that you both have, that's really beautiful. And so hopefully, yeah, everyone can aspire, our listeners, to something like that. So yeah, thanks for sharing. Just one more thing on that. I think a lot of people, especially younger people, may mistake the whole like chemistry and the butterflies for like a good relationship. And I think that can be very dangerous, right? To just go after the roller coaster of, oh my God, now he likes me and now he's not texting me, let me like chase him. And it's just I think as we grow older and hopefully more mature, that's not what we should be striving for. But yeah, anyway, so
I always think you should never move in with someone unless you've had at least one serious fight.
Yes.
That's a good one.
You should not be making those moves when you're still in that butterfly era.
That's good advice. Yeah.
And I feel like people, maybe just as you get older, you learn how to quote unquote fight, right? But like really just have disagreements, set boundaries, or like have these difficult conversations. Because I feel like also when I was younger, like I get so defensive so quickly. Like, yeah, if somebody were to set a boundary with me, I would have reacted probably, maybe I would have been the toxic one, who knows? But Anna, back to kind of our conversation here. One of the gray areas that, as we're thinking about this topic, one of the gray areas is the natural ups and downs of life, right? Like we talked about checking in with each other and the fact
Mhm.
that, none of us are having all the time 100% days. There
Right.
are situations where sometimes your partner is struggling. Some people's partners are depressed, anxious, right? Dealing with other issues, personal life issues, dependent issues. And there's just so many things that happen in life that could impact a relationship naturally.
Mhm.
What's been your experience? Let's just use your current relationship, right? Like in a healthy relationship, what's been your experience with the ups and downs? How do you differentiate between the natural things versus more of the microaggression that can happen in a relationship?
Yeah, and I think with this specific question, Tim and I have had such a different um, path here compared to most people because Tim and I met at work. We were dating for a little bit while we were working together, and then we were always hanging out with each other after work. So we were with each other 24/7 for about a year, and so we were able to see when each other were having bad days in real time. We could see what's happening with each other. Um, and we were able to react in real time. And so when we both decided to leave that job and pursue other careers, we had to kind of find out the hard way that we're not there to witness each other's entire day anymore. So we have to check in with each other. We have to say, hey, are you at 100% today? Like, how are you doing? What are your wins for today? What were your losses? Like, I want to know. And so we didn't get those conversations perfect by any means when that situation started, but we've gotten there. It takes a lot of work to the point where you kind of ask them without even thinking about it. So we've had a little bit of a learning process there. It's a different situation, but I'm glad that we went through it because our communication is so much better right now than when we first started dating.
For me and my partner, he could very well had a bad day today, right? Like if I don't ask him or check in,
Yeah.
I have no idea. And he could then, I don't know, be snappy with me, or I could be snappy with him tonight, but it could have been because somebody was awful to me at work today that had nothing to do with my partner. But then it kind of leads into, like you start to push your frustration out at home to your partner. We continue to anchor on this idea of like toxicity develops over time, right? Like it's a lot of microaggressions, it's things on top of each other. But at the same time, like I'm also thinking, we've all had low periods of our life. This is not even just one day in our work, right? Like one day, okay, that explains us being snappy at home or being impatient. But what about situations where your partner is I don't know, depressed, right? Going through things that take a long time. Like a lot of life things are not something that just resolves within a day or a week. Sometimes it could be years dragging on. And that changes their behavior at home or their relationship with you over time. And maybe they're not pulling their weight. Maybe they're being more snappy in general. And it is impacting your mental health. How do you go about differentiating that? Because that gets really tricky.
Yeah, so I believe that patience is definitely key here. Every situation like this is going to be different, and every single person is different. Their communication is going to be different. So it is going to be a case by case situation, in my opinion. For me personally, I have depression. I have clinical depression, and Tim has been a real team player because I don't always snap out of it after a week. I don't always snap out of it after a couple of days. Sometimes it is months. And when things do get to a point where, my partner might be getting a little testy saying, hey, I need you to pull your weight a little bit more. It's your responsibility as a partner to hear him and to accept it and to at least try to work on it.
And I'm so glad that Tim is obviously so much more receptive to this. Could you contrast for our audience, so like previously in your previous relationships where this may not have been as received? And thank you for being so vulnerable to sharing about the depression. like how, just so that someone that may face similar struggles, like what is, do you have an example of how your maybe a previous relationship would have responded to that?
Yeah, definitely not well.
Yeah.
I before Tim, I have never had someone respond to that well. It's always, oh, she's just exaggerating. And I was treated as if I was making it up. I was treated as if I should be the same person I was yesterday, today, at all times, and I need to be consistent. And when I was showing that vulnerability and being down and trying to open up to my partner at that time, it was never well received. It was always, well, you should go to the gym more. Well, you should try to eat something else. And that may work for some people. It may help some people, but when you have clinical depression, that's not always going to be the answer. And so if you're experiencing that, if you're in a relationship where your partner is putting you down for something that you're going through, gaslighting you, and not willing to help you when you're down, that's not someone, in my opinion, that's worth sacrificing for.
I think a lot of it ends up becoming guilt. Like I remember when I'm in toxic relationships, I feel a lot of guilt. And I feel bad for feeling a certain way, for experiencing certain things, whether it's mental health or whatever the reason may be, or not feeling enough, right? Because this person gaslit you and you feel guilty. Whereas I feel like now, like with my partner, last year I was in therapy a lot and I was really struggling. Like it was a low period of my life, and it took months for me to get out of it, like almost a year. And it's such a long time. And part of me feels like it's tough, right? It's a lot on my partner. But I think what really reassured me is like my partner wanted to learn about the situation. He wanted to learn like what type of language should he use to then, support me in various situations. And then seeing him like take on that behavior, right? Like not only me telling him what I need and what type of like language would be helpful for me, but also then seeing him execute that and try as much as he can to then remember to do those things. Like a lot of times it's those little things that are signs of a more positive relationship. The other partner not only caring about the situation, not blaming you, but also like actively like taking action to then make things easier for you to go focus on yourself or focus on whatever the situation is. And it sounds like, Anna, that's kind of your experience with your partner as well.
That's just really sad that you had to go through that. On the notion, so I know we talked a lot about therapy and the role of that. But if we could go a little bit deeper into it's easy for us to obviously blame that partner, and oftentimes it's justified, right? But without going into like victim shaming and blaming, and I've done that many times to my ex, but sort of flipping the switch on what is the role of self-reflection, like what can we do to look inward and in terms of our patterns, to why did we get to this point, right, where we are, and why do we keep attracting these types of people? Anna, what's your experience in terms of self-reflection and just that role that it plays?
Yeah, I think in a lot of situations it takes two to tango, and with microaggressions, we can all force that onto our partner. And being able to be in a place where you can pause and take a step back and really look at the situation through different lenses, and see that, hey, you know what, my ex-partner, he did a lot of things that I didn't enjoy and that were toxic. I may have also done a few things. I may have raised my voice a couple of times. I may have not talked to my partner respectfully on purpose, not out of spite, and therefore adding fuel to the fire. I'm definitely guilty of that.
Same here.
Yeah.
Um,
And those are things that you're not going to, in my opinion, see in real time. You're not going to, while you're in that relationship, see that you are also feeding into the microaggressions. Because I think that when we're all hurt, we all want to be in that, we want to be called as the victim at all times. And that's not always going to be the case. You need to take a step back and see your faults as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I definitely can attest to that. It's yeah, and like you said, it takes two to tango, and seeing your side of it, and your role in this relationship, right? So pivoting over to the other side, when someone realizes that they are in a toxic relationship, what are some of the things what are some of the steps that you would recommend they can take to navigate those challenges? And is there a way out? Like, are there steps someone can take to create a healthier dynamic?
Yeah, I would highly recommend talking to your friends and family if you're comfortable, and seeing if they can share experiences and see if they're able to shed some light on your situation. I would recommend heavily leaning on that, or seeking therapy. And aside from that, just learning to really have respect for the relationship, have respect for yourself and for your partner. And, if you're in a situation where you don't think that's possible or you're not feeling it, I don't know if that's a relationship that you want to stay in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you touched on something super critical, which is the crux of the episode almost, right? Like, is there a way to transform a toxic relationship into a healthy one? It sounds like you've definitely been in the trenches and you probably tried. Um, Walk us through, is there even a solution? I'm guessing a lot of it has to do with, are both parties equally committed? And understanding sometimes one party may not be as healthy, right? Maybe and this is where I think this is the gray area, right? Like, one person may not be as strong right now. Maybe they're battling depression. Maybe they can't really work on their relationship. But in your experience, is there a way out, and can you truly transform, or what are some of the, I guess, premises that need to be met in order for this to happen?
Yeah, I think that's a case by case basis. Um, I think in most cases, I don't know if that's something that can be changed and formed into a healthy relationship, because so many lines and boundaries have been crossed and disrespected. So how do you truly come back from that in a healthy way? I think maybe some people can do that. I think that's very rare, because when, let's say you want to move forward, you want to fix the relationship and say it's healthy, later down the road and you're having a disagreement and things get heated, some old things are going to get brought back up, new wounds are going, or old wounds are going to be reopened, and it's going to hurt 10 times more. And I don't think that those wounds are ever going to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is one of those questions where I'm just so torn. Like, I think to your point, it is case by case. And I don't think we can necessarily generalize, because I've seen so many people like have lifelong relationship. Like, even my parents, right? Like, they've had difficult years of their relationship where, just for transparency, like we're immigrants. And so when we first came to America, like we had a lot of financial burden. And when you have financial burden, it's very hard to talk romance and love, right? Like you are fighting all the time because you can barely put food on the table, like, and shelter, right, for your kids. And so, like, I've definitely seen my parents go through extremely difficult times in their relationship where, like, yeah, sometimes I'm like, maybe this is getting toxic, right? Like you talked a lot about
Right.
respecting yourself, respecting each other. Like when things are tough, it's really hard to do that. But like now we're in a much better place in life. Like I have a very stable job. I can help them. They have a very stable job and they're very like self sustainable and they're doing very well. And like their relationship is at some of the best times that I've seen, like especially as an adult. And so it's hard, right? Like I want to believe that it's possible, but at the same time, to your point, when you lose that respect, how do you bring that back without insecurity?
Yeah, I think that's where Jen and I have had the most conversations about in terms of different viewpoints. And I so love the example of your parents. Like it's very admirable. I come from a divorced family, right? Where I can see how my parents are better off without each other, where it just wasn't the right match. And I do believe in working on something, but I think the big difference is working together against the problem, not against each other. I think that is, to me, if I had to summarize what my opinion is. And I've just been in situations where that wasn't the case, where I was really fighting for the relationship and I could see the other person was checked out. Like the lack of respect is a big deal, right? And then if you're not feeling like the partner is working with you against the problem, it's like against each other constantly.
Right. And then at that point, it's really, do you want to stay in a relationship like that? Is that what, your end goal is? Do you want to be with that the rest of your life?
I've definitely had friends who were in relationships that I was like, oh, I don't know if that is good for you. Or maybe I feel that down the line it could hurt my friend, right? Like I don't know what their dynamic is. So sometimes like I don't want to speak up. And it's not that I don't care about my friend, but like I don't know where he or she is in that relationship. They could very well be very happy in the relationship. And it's, not my place to tell my friend this or that. And so there are situations where, as the friend and as the third party, I've opted to be the supportive person rather than the person who's calling out somebody else's partner. Like I don't want to be that girl.
Yeah.
So stepping out of the like primary people in the relationship, if you are the friend, the family, how do you support your friends without being the person to then be negative and call out someone else's relationship? Like what's your experience with that?
Yeah, it's tough because I've been on both sides of that where I have had to confront a friend before about a relationship that in my opinion was toxic, and I didn't like that for my friend. So I had to go into that conversation being okay with potentially losing the relationship that I have with my friend,
Mm,
over making sure that she's okay, because I care about her well-being more than I guess me being on speaking terms, because I love that person so much. I just want them to be okay. So you have to go into the conversation without understanding, in my opinion. And I've also been on the receiving end of of those of that criticism and feedback. So back when that was me, I was not in a place where I was ready and willing to accept that. And what
yeah.
I ended up doing is I ended up pushing a lot of people away. I ended up pushing my family away, ruined relationships, and had to work for years to repair those relationships.
Mm,
Um, but I also pushed away friends as well, and that's just what happens when you're confronting someone who is in a toxic relationship and they are not ready to hear it. They're not ready to accept it
right.
because they're taking it as a personal attack.
Yeah. And would you still recommend for any of our listeners who may have a family or friend who they perceive are maybe in a bad relationship or toxic relationship, would you recommend that they reach out to their friend or family, or what would you do? Like it sounds like you would.
I would, because it's better to reach out and have the backlash come than to have something escalate and get into a worse situation, and now you're feeling very guilty and you're saying, wow, I wish I would have just taken that effort and put my feelings aside to go to my friend, to go to my family member, just to check on them, and just let them know what I think of their relationship. I recommend choosing words wisely, and I recommend coming at the conversation with a very soft angle.
Anna, I know we're coming to a close here. one last question for you. What would you tell your younger self? Maybe when you first met or started dating the partners that were toxic, what would you tell your younger self?
I would tell myself to love myself. I would tell myself to focus on myself. And I would also tell myself to trust my friends and family, because they are there for a reason. And especially your family, they have your back unconditionally for the most part. And so I didn't believe in any of that when I was younger. And that's really unfortunate, but I would definitely tell my younger self that.
Oh, what a beautiful way to close. Well, thank you, Anna, so much for being here today and for your vulnerability, for your candor, for your openness. So many great nuggets for listeners. And before we let you go, any projects you're working on and where can our audience find you?
You can find me on my private Instagram that I'll make public.
Nice.
It's just Anna Badursk, or Facebook. I'm not huge into social media, but I would love to have any conversations with any listeners here who have further questions or who are going through a difficult time, and you just need somebody to talk to and help navigate through your situation and your relationship. I'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you and to help you.
That is incredible. Well, listeners, you heard it here first. Thank you, Anna. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. So, yep. So to our listeners, as always, I'd love to hear from you. And Anna graciously offered her advice and guidance. So please reach out to us at whereisthelinepod@gmail.com. And of course, you can find us on Instagram at whereisthelinepod. And then we are on everywhere you listen to your podcast. So on Apple, Spotify, and Google. And as always, continue to rate the podcast. We really appreciate everyone's support and we need those reviews. So really much appreciated. And I look forward to the next episode. Thank you so much, everyone.